just a challenge which I think will face anyone, faces us in Britain, will face the European Parliament as well, a huge asymmetry in terms of resources, propaganda and advocacy. Azerbaijan and Turkey are extremely well resourced. Azerbaijan, of course, has massive oil money thanks to BP. And thanks to BP, it also has the support of the British government to a very considerable extent. Proof of that is I'd been in Karabakh when Azerbaijan had been using cluster bombs on children. And I'd seen children shredded by cluster bombs. And I went, when I came back to Britain, to the then Minister of State for that part of the world, and asked the Minister of State, I think it's right to say the names now, at the time I didn't because it was probably, it was an unofficial briefing, but anyone can put two and two together now and work out, it was then Douglas Hogg. I went to Douglas Hogg and I said, look, Azerbaijan is using cluster bombs on children, please. Azerbaijan is a signatory to international human rights conventions. It's a member of the OSCE. Will you ask cluster bombs to stop, Azerbaijan to stop dropping cluster bombs on children? It's against all, it's a violation of fundamental human rights. The answer I had has full marks for brevity. No country has an interest in other countries, only interests, and we have oil interests in Azerbaijan, and I was showed the door. I was mortified, wasn't going to let that pass unrecorded, initiated a debate in the House of Lords, said a senior person in the Foreign Office, that was who it was, I quoted that, and I said, for the first time in my life, I'm ashamed to be British. I'm not naive. I can understand commercial interest, I can understand strategic interest, but I don't think it's a long-term interest of any nation to let those concerns obliterate concern for human rights. And I don't think the majority of British people would want oil at the price of cluster bombs on children, at least without saying something about it. But British foreign policy is inherently skewed in favour of Azerbaijan. I think all the evidence shows that. The Foreign Office will actually admit that very often in unofficial meetings and sometimes more publicly. So there is a problem of asymmetry of British foreign policy thanks to oil. There is a problem too of asymmetry in terms of resources for propaganda. A week ago last Monday, I attended a meeting organised, and some people here, at that meeting, the European Azerbaijan Society. It's just been set up in London. It's an extremely well-funded organisation, and it is clearly here to represent the interest and the perspectives on history of Azerbaijan. Armenia does not have similarly lavish resources to provide similar briefings and similar access or invitations to take part in both meetings in that kind of forum or visits to Baku. Parliamentarians are always being invited to Baku, scholars being invited to Baku to hear the Azeri point of view, and that is represented very fulsomely. It's very difficult for Armenia, does not have comparable resources for that kind of lavish entertainment and promotion of their version of history. And as one other example, you may have drawn to your attention in your political arenas this which Azerbaijan brings out every year, called, it's spelled Kojali, it's pronounced Hodrolu, the Hodrolu tragedy. It's currently an EDM up in the House of Commons about the Hodrolu massacre. But I can tell you, I was in Karabakh about the time the Hodrolu tragedy occurred. It was a tragedy. It was a tragedy of war. If you want to see the truth of it, it's written in here. I won't take up time now, but all I will say is it was not a massacre. It was, Armenia did everything it could to try to avoid the deaths of those civilians. They gave advance warning of their attack on Hodrolu, which they had to take. It was being used as a base for shelling 400 Grada down to Stepanakert, but they gave the civilians advance notice. They gave them for a week, they asked the civilians to withdraw, and there's independent evidence of that from Azeris themselves, who said they felt so safe, they thought the Armenians would never take Hodrolu, they didn't bother to go. When they got there, the Armenians saw civilians still there, delayed the assault. The Azeri soldiers fled using the civilians as a kind of human shield. Sadly, civilians were killed, but it wasn't anything like the numbers that are claimed, and it was certainly not without Armenians trying to prevent that happening. So one of the things which will be coming up, and maybe just like to flag up for our politicians, is this massive asymmetry of availability of propaganda and alternative points of view. And just very briefly, if we look at one of the other claims Azerbaijan makes, Azerbaijan talks about the way the Armenians have destroyed their holy sites. All I would say is there is nothing compared with Nakhchivan, where priceless, countless Armenian Christian monuments and artifacts and churches were destroyed cold blood and completely flattened very recently, some of you may remember. And just for the record, in Shushi, which was a town occupied by Azeris, there were 2 mosques. Both of those mosques were protected when Shushi was taken. I think one is now being restored by Iranians. So it is a massive asymmetry in terms of representation of truth, a massive asymmetry in terms of violations of human rights, according to the evidence having been there. And so my concluding remarks is that I wish you very, very well. I hope you will be there in Europe, and wish you very well in your own parliamentary and political careers, whichever arenas you're operating in. But those are just my thoughts, and my conclusions are 2 of the issues I would really flag up as key areas. One is the need for a just solution to the Karabakh conflict, not any of the ones which refuse to give the Armenians there the right to make their own decision. Not for me to tell what's best for them, but they deserve a referendum, they deserve self-determination, if anybody does. And secondly, on the humanitarian aid side, this has been flagged up for you, I've mentioned the need for all kinds of assistance to Armenia itself, humanitarian, post-earthquake, refugees. There are many, many refugees from the pogroms, the killings in Baku and Sumgait and Kirovabad, as well as the war in Karabakh. They do need help, and for Karabakh itself, there is a huge aid deficit. It was virtually pulverized. My own small NGO is helping the rehabilitation center in Stepanakert. The Armenians are fantastic at using a little, making it go a long way, with enormous resourcefulness, enormous resilience. But they do need humanitarian aid in Karabakh. UN still won't go there. Why? There's no good reason. Because they work in other disputed territories like Abkhazia. There needs to be a lot of pressure put on the UN organizations like UNHCR to be working there in Karabakh to bring much, much needed help. So thank you for letting me share some of my perceptions, some of the priorities as I see them, and some of the issues which I think and hope will be addressed in the European Parliament and addressed with a full knowledge of the perspective from the Armenian point of view. And I believe that on a lot of these issues, they actually have history, truth, and justice on their side. Thank you.
So, ladies first. I will ask Uta to speak first, and very grateful that you could both join us tonight. So Uta Michel, right?
Michel, yeah.
Michel represents the Green Party.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Is that there is no reason to prevent a European country from becoming a member of the European Union, and Greens have always been very clear on this. It was actually thanks to the initiative of the Greens that all the Caucasus countries have been included in the European neighborhood policy. That was in response to the fact that the European Commission had originally excluded them from it. So the plan was that normally they should not have been part of this, but thanks to the pressure that the Green MEPs in Parliament put up, this was reversed. Again, there's a clear yes to this, and we're not saying this only in the case of Armenia, but that is a fundamental principle that should be granted to all ethnic minorities that find themselves living in the European Union. What we would like to see is that there is closer cooperation between the Armenian authorities and the respective member states to make a concerted effort to support this. We are of the view that this should be addressed in the accession negotiations with Turkey. And again, that is something that we believe in, not only, but obviously also, but not only in the case of Armenia. The respect for minority rights is a fundamental issue. And far too often we have seen, and another recent example is the partnership agreement with Israel, where the economic aspect of cooperation seems to dominate the debate and the development of the cooperation between the European